In 2019, Harvard University researchers divided an introductory physics class into two distinct cohorts. One group attended traditional, high-quality lectures from seasoned professors. The other group engaged in active learning, where they spent class time solving problems in small groups with minimal intervention from the instructor. When students evaluated the experience afterward, the results were clear. The traditional lecture group rated the teaching quality much higher. They walked out of the auditorium feeling confident that they had mastered the material. However, testing revealed a massive disconnect. On the left, the students' subjective ratings show the lecture group felt superior. On the right, objective test scores show the active cohort significantly outperformed peers in conceptual understanding. The study uncovered a stark inverse correlation. The more students felt they were learning, the worse they actually performed on the exams. High student evaluations for a smooth lecture do not indicate that the material has been mastered. This gap between feeling like you know something and actually knowing it is called the illusion of competence. When an expert explains a concept clearly, the student's brain follows the logic without resistance. This low-friction processing creates a false sense of fluency. The student confuses the ease of listening with the hard work of learning. Active learning environments replace that ease with cognitive friction. The frustration and struggle of solving a problem from scratch are the very things that lead to deeper retention. Conceptual mastery requires this friction. To produce graduates who can solve non-standard problems, universities must re-engineer their curricula to force students out of passive consumption. This necessity for struggle is rooted in the work of Jean Piaget. He proposed that knowledge isn't a substance to be poured into a student, but a structure the student must build themselves. This diagram represents a mental schema. Piaget identified two ways this web updates. The first is assimilation. When a student hears something that fits their current worldview, the new data slots easily into the existing web. It feels comfortable because the web doesn't have to change. Learning occurs when a student faces data that contradicts their existing model, like a student's first encounter with the counterintuitive laws of thermodynamics. This requires a much harder process, accommodation. Contradictory information creates cognitive dissonance. To resolve it, the mental schema physically breaks apart and reconfigures itself to incorporate the new, difficult data. A polished lecture is designed for assimilation. It feels good because it avoids conflict. Active learning is designed for accommodation. It forces the dissonance required for growth. The frustration students feel during problem solving is the biological indicator that their brain is adapting its neural connections. Faculty can intentionally design for this adaptation using a framework called constructive alignment, developed by John Biggs. This system relies on three nodes: the intended learning outcomes, the teaching activities, and the final assessments. If the goal is for a student to critically analyze, but the activity is passive listening, and the assessment is multiple choice, the gears lock. The activities don't actually prepare the student for the goal. The architecture only works when the active verbs match across all 3 points. If the goal is design, then the students must spend class time designing, and the exam must require them to design. Traditional syllabi often fail here by using passive, unobservable verbs like to understand or to know. These cannot be measured or practiced. Without this strict alignment, students will ignore the high-level goals and focus only on the low-level memorization needed to pass the test. The most common objection to this model is the physical constraint of the large lecture hall. Critics argue that active learning cannot scale to a room of 300 students. A tactic called chunking splits the hour into 15-minute bursts of instruction. This prevents the inevitable crash in student attention that occurs during a continuous lecture. These gaps are then filled with pure instruction, a technique popularized by physicist Eric Mazur. The professor poses a conceptual question. Students vote individually, then turn to a neighbor and argue their position. Forcing a student to explain their logic to a peer exposes the holes in their mental model that they didn't realize existed while just listening to the professor. This peer-to-peer interaction utilizes Lev Vygotsky's social constructivism. He demonstrated that students often solve problems more effectively when collaborating with peers who are at a similar developmental level. Implementing constructivism doesn't require renovated classrooms. It requires designing specific moments of social friction within the existing ones. The final stage is the exam. Active teaching techniques are useless if the final assessment only rewards rote memorization. Universities should utilize authentic assessment, which tests students using tasks they will actually perform in the workplace, like conducting a code review or writing a professional brief. Evaluating these complex tasks is often viewed as too subjective or time-consuming for large classes. Analytic rubrics solve this by breaking complex projects into measurable criteria. This makes the grading process objective and scalable across hundreds of students. Distributing these rubrics early provides scaffolding for the students. It gives them a transparent target and helps them navigate the difficulty of the task. True cognitive alignment is only validated when we measure the depth of a student's application rather than the volume of their memory. Students often push back against these methods, complaining that the professor is making them do all the work instead of teaching. This resistance occurs because active learning destroys the student's illusion of competence. The comfortable feeling of following a lecture is gone, replaced by the discomfort of real work. This pushback can be mitigated through radical transparency. Showing the Harvard data on day one helps students realize their frustration isn't failure. It is the physical manifestation of their brain building new connections. Viewing students as informed partners in their own neurological development moves the focus away from their immediate comfort and toward their long-term growth. The Desloriers study demonstrates that the traditional lecture model, despite its history, consistently fails to produce conceptual mastery. This shift requires professors to stop viewing themselves as transmitters of content and start acting as architects of the educational environment. This change aligns institutional practice with the neurobiological reality of how schemas update. Educators can start by making small adjustments, changing one syllabus verb, introducing one peer discussion, or designing one clear rubric. Ultimately, higher education only achieves its purpose when institutional teaching methods match the active mechanics of human cognition.